She ran away from home to avoid marrying a cruel man and found refuge with a powerful millionaire. Lena Carter wanted only one thing: peace. After everything she had endured, lies, betrayal, and the terrifying feeling of being treated like a commodity, she just wanted to start over, somewhere the past couldn't reach her. New York was her escape, a city loud, crowded, messy, but vast enough to disappear in. She enrolled in an interior design program where she met Chloe Sullivan, a bright, sharp-tongued girl with a heart even bigger than the city itself. Chloe quickly became Lena's first real friend in years. They studied together, shared lunch, and whispered about professors and assignments. But Chloe also noticed something else, something haunted behind Lena's quiet smile and blue-gray eyes. She didn't ask. She waited. Until one afternoon, Lena nearly collapsed in the campus courtyard after receiving a text from a number she thought she'd blocked forever. Chloe didn't ask questions. She simply took Lena's hand and said, "We're going home. You'll be safe there." Home, in Chloe's world, was her brother's penthouse. Ethan Sullivan, CEO of a major construction firm, was rarely around, always in meetings or jetting off to international sites. But he adored his sister, and the apartment he provided for her was a fortress high above the Upper East Side skyline, all glass and clean lines and breathtaking views. For the first time in months, Lena could breathe, if only just a little. She didn't know yet that inside those glass walls and warm golden lights, a new chapter of her life was quietly waiting to begin. A chapter she wasn't looking for. But destiny never asks for permission. Lena hadn't expected him to be home. Chloe had been clear. He's barely here, always in meetings, traveling. We'll have the whole place to ourselves. The thought had calmed Lena. She wasn't good with strangers, especially not men. But when the glass doors slid open and ushered them into the sunlit penthouse, Lena froze. He was standing in the kitchen, a white dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves, the collar unbuttoned, a loose tie hanging casually. One hand held a mug of coffee, the other raked through slightly tousled dark brown hair. He hadn't looked up yet, was deep in a phone call, but his voice, low and rough, made her breath catch. When their eyes finally met, time did something strange. It paused. Ethan Sullivan was tall, commanding, and wore the stillness of someone used to control. But when those cool gray eyes locked onto hers, Lena felt something else entirely, like he saw through her, as if he could read the quiet ache in her gaze. Chloe cleared her throat, shattering the moment. "Ethan, this is Lena, my best friend from school. She's going to stay with me for a while." Ethan stepped closer, and with every step, Lena felt the space tighten with something unspoken. He wasn't unkind, not threatening, but his presence demanded attention. He didn't speak immediately, just looked at her, not suspicious, not surprised, but focused, sharply, undeniably focused. "Welcome to my home, Lena," he said at last, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "Make yourself comfortable." Lena nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Thank you." She nearly stepped back when he extended his hand, large, warm, steady. She hesitated, then placed her fingers in his. The contact was brief, but something passed between them, something that brushed deeper than skin. Even when their hands parted, their eyes did not. "The guest room is down the hall to the left," Ethan said, turning to Chloe but still glancing at Lena. "She can use anything she needs." "I'll do more than that," Chloe murmured beside her. Ethan nodded and walked away. But Lena knew, in that brief wordless exchange, something had shifted. She had come here to escape her past. She didn't realize she had just stepped into her future. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who got easily affected. He'd met all kinds of people in his life, women who were bold, seductive, clever, fragile, even dangerous. As a CEO, he'd learned to read people quickly. Every glance, every voice, every smile hid a motive. He had become an expert in building distance, keeping control. But the girl standing in front of him now was different. Lena Carter wasn't trying to impress him. She didn't lift her chin in defiance. She didn't fake confidence, nor did she shrink into helplessness for sympathy. And yet, in her silence, in those cautious blue-gray eyes, Ethan saw something he couldn't look away from. There was a crack somewhere inside her, but it hadn't broken her. She was delicate, but not weak. And what held his gaze was the quiet defiance in the way she stood. Lena looked like someone who could shatter under the wrong touch, but she remained upright, steady. Her silence wasn't submission, it was armor. A quiet, fierce kind of strength, the kind you only get when you've had no choice but to survive. She didn't belong to the glittering world he knew, the world of polished smiles and curated charm. She came from someplace rawer, realer. And in that instant, Ethan realized something that made his chest tighten. If he wasn't careful, this girl, with stories tucked deep behind her guarded eyes, could be the one to unravel the very walls he'd spent a lifetime building. Lena had tried to convince herself that the past was over. She kept herself busy, attending classes, doing assignments, helping Chloe clean, even making morning coffee on occasion. She moved through life like a student just trying to stay afloat. But the past rarely lets go that easily. That afternoon, Lena was sitting alone in the courtyard. One hand held a half-finished design sketch, the other stirred a glass of iced tea absently. Chloe had just left for class, and Lena figured she'd stay a bit longer to enjoy the breeze. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You think you can hide from me?" Her heart stopped. She didn't need to see the name to know who it was. No matter how many numbers she changed, no matter how many accounts she deleted, Damian Royce always found a way. Her grip tightened around the phone as panic surged. Not here, not now. But her breath came short and her vision began to blur. Chloe found her minutes later, pale and trembling. No questions asked, she just grabbed Lena's hand and walked her to the car. Lena didn't speak on the ride back, but tears traced silent lines down her cheeks. Chloe didn't press her, but she knew. There was something darker than Lena ever let on. And when they got home, she called Ethan. He arrived in less than 15 minutes. The moment he entered, his eyes scanned the room and landed on Lena, curled up on the couch, staring at her phone like it was a loaded weapon. "What happened?" His voice was low and cold, calculated and prepared for battle. Chloe handed him Lena's phone. The message was short, but the weight of it made Ethan's jaw clench. "Who is he?" he asked. Lena finally looked up and met his eyes. "Damian Royce," she said, each syllable like glass in her throat. "The man my father tried to marry me off to. The man I ran from 2 years ago." Silence. It was Chloe who finally spoke. "He's not just some controlling rich guy. I looked him up. There are rumors. Money laundering, trafficking, underground dealings. He's dangerous." Ethan turned to Lena. "What did he do to you?" She shook her head slowly, but her eyes, they were hollow. "Not physically," she whispered. "But he controlled everything, my every move, my thoughts, my freedom. When I ran, he promised he'd destroy everything I ever cared about." Ethan walked to the large window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the cityscape. "Well then," he said, his voice low but steel-edged, "he's about to learn that he doesn't get to touch what doesn't belong to him." Lena stared at his back, strong, unmoving, and for the first time since the message arrived, she didn't feel alone. No one mentioned Damian again. Ethan didn't ask questions. Chloe didn't press. They gave Lena space, but their presence was steady, comforting, constant. Lena began to feel safe. She started waking up earlier, making coffee for the three of them, sometimes even attempting pancakes, messy but endearing. Chloe was often tied up with classes, and slowly, the rhythm of the apartment settled around the two who remained, Lena and Ethan. Ethan wasn't talkative, but his presence was grounding. He worked in the room off the living area, but every time Lena passed by, he'd glance up, nod slightly, as if to say, "I see you, I'm here." She began to notice the little things. He always poured her an extra cup of coffee in the morning without asking. He left his coat draped on the chair near her sketching spot, so she could wrap it around herself when she got cold. He never touched her, never crossed a line, but somehow every gesture made her feel safe, protected. One night, Lena couldn't sleep. She wandered out onto the balcony with a blanket and a mug of tea. The city below glowed endlessly, but up there, it was quiet. "Can't sleep?" Ethan's voice came from behind her, low and warm. She turned to see him holding his own mug of tea, wearing a simple t-shirt that made him seem more human than corporate. He joined her without invitation, settling into the chair beside hers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They sat in silence for a long time, comfortable, unforced. Finally, Lena whispered, "I thought if I ran far enough, he wouldn't find me." Ethan looked over. "He found you, but this time he can't touch you." She turned to him. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted over the skyline before he replied, "I don't know. Maybe because you remind me that not everyone has the privilege of being free. Maybe because you don't pretend to be strong like most people. You actually are, in ways you don't even realize." She looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. A real smile. From that moment on, something began to change between them. No declarations, no rush, just longer glances, softer gestures. One afternoon, Lena came home from class and found a small glass jar sitting on the kitchen counter. No note, no explanation. Just dried lavender, gently arranged. She didn't need to ask. Only one person in the apartment knew she loved lavender, and the next morning, when she tiptoed out of her room, she found Ethan asleep on the couch, head tilted back, laptop still open, coffee cold. She grabbed a throw blanket and gently draped it over his shoulders. As her hand brushed his arm, his eyes opened slowly. Their eyes met. No words were spoken. But in that quiet, Lena understood. She didn't have to keep running anymore. Lena began to feel like she belonged to this place and to this man. Not because of sweet words or grand gestures, but because of the way Ethan noticed the smallest things about her, the kind of details she never thought anyone would see. He knew she didn't like ice in her water. After the first night, she winced at a cold glass. There was always a bottle left at room temperature on the table the next morning. No one mentioned it. But it was always there. He noticed she hugged a pillow when she slept, and somehow the couch where she napped during the day had an extra throw pillow. Soft, comfortable. The exact shade of slate blue she always gravitated toward. He remembered that she scratched just behind her ear when she was nervous, and every time he saw her do it, he would quietly pour her a cup of hot tea and place it near her, like a silent reminder to breathe. No explanations, no unnecessary questions, just presence, observation, care. He saw her, and he remembered. To Lena, that mattered more than any gift, because for the first time in her life, she didn't have to work to be noticed. She didn't have to speak to be cared for. With Ethan, she didn't have to try to be loved. She just had to be herself. As time passed, Lena began to feel something she never thought she'd know again. Peace. Quiet mornings, sunlight drifting through the curtains, the faint scent of coffee, the steady footsteps of Ethan down the hall. Little pieces of life that felt like home. She began to dream of a future, one without fear. But the past, especially the kind that was never buried, doesn't let go so easily. And when the first storm came, it didn't knock politely. It came crashing in like a flood. Lena had begun to believe she had truly escaped the darkness. The days in the penthouse flowed like quiet, golden dreams. She painted more, cooked more, even sang softly sometimes while the rain tapped gently on the windows. Ethan never said anything about it, but every time she sang, he stopped whatever he was doing, just to listen. And in those quiet moments, she let herself believe. Maybe peace was real after all. But nightmares don't disappear. They wait, quietly, patiently. It started small. One afternoon, walking home from class, she had the chilling sensation that someone was following her. Every time she paused, the sound of footsteps stopped too. When she moved again, so did they. No one was ever there when she turned, just shadows. But they lingered. Days later, she found a plain envelope slipped under the door. Inside, a single piece of paper with 4 words, sharp and cold. "You can't run forever." Ethan read the note silently. His face gave nothing away, but his hand clenched so tightly the paper ripped between his fingers. He said nothing. No comfort, no empty reassurances. But the next morning, there were new security guards stationed at the elevator and patrolling the halls. Cameras were checked, alarms retested. Ethan didn't ask how she felt. He just acted, quiet, precise. And somehow that frightened her more, because she knew if he was preparing for the worst, then the worst was coming. And it came on a rainy night. She was in the living room curled up with a book. The wind howled softly outside. Chloe had gone to bed. Ethan was working in his office. Everything was still, too still. Then she heard it, a soft metallic sound. She looked up. Another faint click. It was coming from the balcony. Slowly, Lena stood. Her breath caught in her throat. She walked to the tall glass doors, drawn curtains shielding what lay beyond. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the fabric slightly, just enough to see. A man, standing, still, just beyond the glass. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply watched. A cigarette in hand, glowing red like a warning light. He wanted her to see him. He wanted her to fear him. She backed away, heart pounding, hands numb. She didn't scream. She ran, to Ethan. He opened the door before she could knock, like he already knew. "There's someone on the balcony," she breathed. Ethan said nothing. He moved instantly, phone in hand, already dialing security. She followed, watched him from behind. His voice was sharp, controlled, deadly calm. When he hung up, he turned and stepped toward her, placing both hands on her shoulders with quiet strength. "You're okay," he said softly. "No one touches you while you're here." She looked up into his eyes, and what she saw wasn't just protection, it was fire, fear, anger, and something deeper. "I can't let you get dragged into this," she whispered. Ethan shook his head, stepped closer. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. "As long as I'm breathing, no one will ever hurt you." She broke. Tears fell, but not from fear, from something deeper. Because this time, someone didn't run, didn't walk away. He stayed. The next morning, the surveillance confirmed it. One of Damien's men had climbed up from the floor below. Impossible, some would say, but not for men like Damien. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. But the next day, steel-reinforced glass replaced every window. Motorized shutters were installed. Security doubled. He didn't fight out of obligation. He was preparing for war. And Lena, she no longer just felt protected. She felt loved, without words, without conditions, just by standing beside him. It was enough. After that night, the distance between them vanished. Ethan was no longer just the man who offered her a place to stay. He became the one she silently reached for when the world grew unsteady. Lena no longer kept herself guarded. Instead, there was quiet trust, gentle presence, and no more hesitation. Every glance they exchanged now held something deeper, something that whispered of connection far beyond fear. But as their bond grew stronger, the shadows began to tighten. Damien would not accept defeat, and a man like him, when he can't control, he destroys. That evening, Ethan took Lena to a small private party hosted by one of his longtime business partners. The atmosphere was elegant but cozy, soft music drifting through the air, warm lights glowing from the chandeliers. Lena wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, nothing loud, but somehow she drew every eye in the room the moment she stepped in. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. He simply stayed close, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. A quiet way of saying she belonged here. And with him. Everything would have stayed perfectly fine, if not for the arrival of a stranger. A young architect, charming, smooth-talking, clearly intrigued by Lena. He approached her with a confident smile, complimented her design sense, made her laugh with some harmless jokes, and even invited her to collaborate on an art installation. Ethan stood not far away, unable to hear what they were saying. But he saw Lena laugh, really laugh. And something inside him tightened. He wasn't used to this feeling, this quiet panic, this fear of losing something he hadn't even dared to fully claim. He didn't lash out, but his expression darkened. The wine glass in his hand trembled slightly. When Lena turned to look at him, about to call him over, her eyes met his, and in that second, she knew. He was jealous. But before she could walk over to him, her phone buzzed in her bag. One message. No name, just a single chilling line. If you don't want Ethan to get a bullet in his head, step out of the building. Now. She froze. The noise of the room faded away. She looked up and saw Ethan, now slowly making his way toward her, eyes still clouded with something unspoken. Lena didn't think. She turned and quietly slipped out through the back entrance of the venue. Within minutes, Ethan realized Lena was gone. Lena was shoved into the back seat of a dark SUV. She didn't scream, didn't fight, but her eyes widened, filled with shock and fury. The man beside her turned, and just like a nightmare coming to life, he smiled. Damien Royce. The face she had spent 2 years trying to forget was now inches away, in a car she couldn't escape. "I missed you, Lena," he whispered, brushing his fingers over her wrist like she was something he owned. "You shouldn't have left like that, and you definitely shouldn't have picked that dull CEO as your knight in shining armor." Lena gritted her teeth, her stare sharp as steel. "Ethan is someone you'll never come close to being." Damien laughed, a cold, lifeless sound. "We'll see if that's still true after tonight." Ethan received the alert less than 10 minutes after Lena disappeared. He left the party without a word, immediately contacting his private security team. Every camera near the venue was scanned within the hour. They found the car, a dark SUV traced to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, once part of a defunct shipping company. No police, no backup. Ethan went with 3 men, 2 elite bodyguards and his head of security. They were dressed in black, armed and ready. But it was Ethan's face that was most dangerous, stone cold, razor sharp, without a trace of hesitation. The warehouse doors groaned open, the rusted hinges screaming into the silence. Inside, the air was damp and thick, the scent of old metal and dust clinging like danger. Each step echoed, slow, deliberate, swallowed by the dark. It didn't feel like walking into a place. It felt like walking into a trap. They moved like shadows, quiet, fast, efficient. Then a voice broke the air. "Ethan Sullivan, you finally showed up." Ethan stepped into the light. Across from him stood Damien, with Lena tied to a steel post behind him. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her gaze didn't waver. "Let her go," Ethan said, his voice low and cutting. "You think you're the one giving orders?" Damien sneered. "You stole her from me, and now you think you're the hero in all this?" Ethan didn't answer. In a split second, his hand moved. Signal given. The men behind him sprang into action. Bright tactical lights flashed, blinding Damien as one of the guards lunged forward. In the chaos, Ethan rushed to Lena, throwing himself in front of her, shielding her with his body. The struggle lasted less than a minute. Damien was slammed to the floor, pinned down with a boot to his neck. Ethan tore the ropes from Lena's wrists, his hands shaking for the first time in a very long while. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. He held her tight, saying nothing. Because this time it was his hands, his presence, that pulled her back from the edge of darkness. She didn't say a word on the way home. Neither did Ethan, but his hand held hers, firmly without letting go, as if releasing it would mean losing her. Back at the penthouse, Lena stood frozen in the living room. She was trembling, her body cold even though the air conditioning was off. Ethan gently led her to her room, brought her a soft cardigan, and sat quietly beside her, not saying a word. Suddenly she broke down, completely without restraint. She cried as though something inside her had finally collapsed, and in that flood of tears was fear, helplessness, and the weight of every wound that had never truly healed. Ethan held her, tightly, not like someone who had rescued her, but like someone who had just saved himself too. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his lips brushing her hair. "I should have gotten there sooner." Lena didn't answer. She simply buried her face into his chest, clutching the fabric of his shirt like it was the only solid thing left in her world. She wasn't as strong as everyone thought, not always composed, not always resilient. In moments like this, she was just a girl who had come so close to losing everything. And Ethan understood that. He didn't ask her to be brave, didn't demand words. He was simply there, steady, silent, unshakable, for her to lean on, to exhale, and to fall apart. After a while, Lena whispered through tears, "I thought I'd never see you again." Ethan froze. Then slowly he let go, lifted her chin, and met her eyes, fully, openly, with nothing left to hide. "Listen to me, Lena," he said softly, voice unwavering like a vow. "You're not just someone I protect. You're the reason I want to live." Her eyes widened, not out of surprise, but because she could feel the weight behind every word. He had carried this truth inside him for so long. "Before I met you," Ethan continued, "my life was nothing but silence and cold. I had power, money, everything the world could offer, but I had no reason to wake up in the morning." He held her hand tighter, his own trembling slightly. "Then you walked in. Quiet, real, and everything I never knew I needed." Lena's tears welled again, not from weakness, but from witnessing Ethan's own, not brokenness, but raw, honest vulnerability. She reached out, gently touched his cheek. "I don't know what I can do with everything you just said, but if you want me to stay." She swallowed hard. "I will." Ethan leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. The world fell away. There was no rushed kiss, no overwhelming passion, no fire. Just two people, shattered, slowly healing, finding each other. He wrapped her in his arms and whispered, "As long as you're here, that's enough." That night, they didn't sleep, not from fear, but because neither wanted to let go. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to shed the armor he'd worn for years. And Lena, for the first time, felt truly loved, not as someone who needed saving, but as someone worth staying for. And in the quiet darkness, there was no fear left between them, only hearts. They didn't talk about what happened, they didn't need to. But slowly, life began to reshape itself, not back to what it was, but into something new. And in the quiet of their rebuilt days, peace came, not as an escape, but as a choice. Time passed. The marks on Lena's shoulder from the ropes had faded, just like the fears in her heart. She laughed more, went out more, and Ethan, like always, was right there beside her. Not as a hero, but as the man who quietly held her hand through every shadow. And one morning in the golden hush of autumn, Ethan made a different kind of promise. Ethan took Lena to the small park where she used to sketch during her early days in New York. They walked around the lake, the wind gentle, golden leaves dancing in the sunlight. As Lena turned to admire the water, Ethan quietly knelt behind her. No flowers, no grand setup, just a simple ring and eyes that held everything. "Lena," he called softly, making her turn around in surprise. He looked up at her, eyes steady, voice trembling just slightly. "Let me protect you, not just today, but forever." Lena froze, then smiled through tears. "Yes," she whispered, nodding. "Forever." When they told Chloe, she squealed so loudly you'd think it was her engagement. "I knew it from the start," she shouted, dancing around the kitchen. "You two were just pretending to take it slow, but fate doesn't wait." The wedding was simple. Just a few close friends under white blossoms in the backyard garden of a quiet old chapel. Lena wore an elegant white dress, Ethan in a gray suit, clean, understated, but the way he looked at her made everything else disappear. In the soft wind and fading sunlight, they held hands and exchanged vows. "I don't promise to always be strong, but I promise to always be there, for your laughter, your tears, your tired days, and your storms. I don't love you because you're perfect. I love you because you make me want to be better every day." Lena held his hands tighter, eyes brimming. "And I promise not to disappear, not to run. I'll stay with you because you're home, the only place I ever want to return to." When they kissed, every scar, every storm, every ache from the past fell away, and in its place began a new chapter, a chapter called peace. 1 year after the wedding, the penthouse that was once Lena's hideaway had truly become a home. But this time, there was no running, no fear. Every corner, every light, every slightly tilted pillow carried the warmth of love and choice. Lena's belly had grown. She was in her 7th month of pregnancy, and every tiny kick brought a smile to her face, not just from joy, but from the quiet disbelief that this life was truly hers now. Ethan had changed in ways she never imagined. Still calm and composed in business, but at home he was gentle, affectionate, and visibly thrilled to become a father. Every evening he performed the same little ritual, lying beside her, placing his hand on her belly, and talking to their daughter as if she already understood everything. "Your mom's a little tired today," he whispered, gently stroking her belly. "So be nice in there, okay? But if you want a story, I'll tell you about the first time I met her." Lena laughed, tapping him on the shoulder. "How many times are you going to tell that story?" "Until she knows it by heart," he smiled, kissing her forehead, and continued his tale, his voice warm, steady, as if every word was being woven into the future. In that moment, the world slowed down. No past, no fear. Just 3 people, a once lonely man, a once broken woman, and a little soul growing out of their love. That night, the 3 of them sat curled up on the living room sofa, the very same spot where Lena once sat alone, clutching a pillow, questioning everything. Now she leaned against her husband, head resting on his lap, his hands wrapped gently around her belly. Chloe, now a freshman in college, sat across from them, animatedly telling stories about campus life. Lena wasn't always listening. Sometimes her eyes drifted to Ethan's hand, softly caressing her stomach, his gaze full of wonder and tenderness. And every time, her heart ached with gratitude. Someone once said the most beautiful things bloom from darkness. Lena believed that now because she had lived it. True love doesn't require perfection. It just needs someone brave enough to stay, patient enough to heal, and loving enough to sacrifice. In that apartment where pain once lived, there was now laughter, lullabies, and promises that didn't need to be spoken aloud. And when Ethan placed his hand over her heart and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up," Lena knew the miracle wasn't what they survived. It was that they were still here, together. Outside, the city lights flickered like 1,000 untold stories, and inside that quiet apartment, one love story had reached its end, only to begin a new chapter, softer, stronger, fuller, because real love doesn't come with fanfare. It grows quietly in places no one looks, in pain, in silence, in survival. And when two people are brave enough to stay, it doesn't just bloom, it becomes home.